Awesome. As you can see, the series is about the stand. I'm so excited about the series. I was really bursting to speak it. Had a really big week this week with Elijah House and the people that have done it with me, Chris, Sally, Rachel, my wife, Sarah, and so intense and so crazy and so awesome. So if you want to learn about Elijah House, go and speak to those guys. If you don't want to go to Elijah House, just come for the food, because that's one of the best reasons too. And Tamer cooked some fantastic food, and everyone took her cards as well, so which is a good sign. She's done something awesome. Let us kick off. How do we stand out in the right ways, at the right time, for the right reason? And I think today, this week, this month is really important, as Craig alluded to, being Pride Month and so on. So we need to stand as Christians. When we compromise on the wrong things, in the wrong ways, at the wrong times, it can cost us way more than we can imagine. So how do we take a stand for the things that matter the most? Israel was conquered by King Nebuchadnezzar. He destroyed Jerusalem, burned their temple, destroyed their religious symbols. The worship of Yahweh, God, is obsolete. I have cancelled the one you say is the one true God. If we turn to Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 to 5, it says, Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of the court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to listen, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Here we see Ashpenaz was tasked with choosing the right guys who were likely to succeed. Teach them the Babylonian language, because the king wants them to speak the way he speaks. Teach them the Babylonian literature. He wants them to think how he thinks. Not only is the king destroying Jerusalem, he's destroying the present. I'm destroying your future by taking the best of your best. I'm making them my leaders so they won't be yours. We see here that the king was very intentional and strategic. In other words, the king wanted them to think like the Babylonians thought, to behave like the Babylonians behaved, and to believe what the Babylonians believed. And we can see the same strategy time and time and time again. Our spiritual enemy, he's the same old dog with the same old tricks, who wants those who follow Christ to think like he thinks, and to believe exactly what he believes, and to behave like he would want us to behave. You see, I believe Satan wants everybody to disregard the teaching of the one true God, and to submit and surrender to the systems of this world. And we all know that there's a full-on spiritual attack against people today, as Satan lies and lies, as he deceives and deceives. And he tries to lure people away from God's best and live according to a lower standard. And that's why I fully believe that it's completely impossible, to be a sort of Christian and have any sense of spiritual success and victory against those temptations and darkness of this world. You can't just be a kind of Christian and expect the victory God wants you to have. I'm going to say that again. You can't just be a kind of Christian, an iffy Christian, and expect the victory God wants you to have. It'll just be exactly like me saying, if I work out a few times a year and expect to be in tip-top physical condition all the time. And it's the same if you can't go to church for 90 minutes a week, and that's the only time you have with God, and expect to be growing and thriving spiritually with God. You got to make the presence of God a priority in your life, where you seek Him, where you depend on Him, where you're living and dwelling in His Word, where it's feeding you, where it's renewing your mind. You're learning to walk by faith and not by sight. You're hearing His Spirit guide and lead you. And again, I said, you can't be a kind of Christian and expect to have life and victory that He wants you to have. Let's have a look at Ephesians 6:11 and 13. It says, "Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to fall over." No, I know you see, it says that you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything. And sometimes you need to take a stand for what matters the most, in the right way, at the right time, and for the right reasons. In the right way, in the right time, and the right reasons. And I propose to you that if you're never standing up, and you're always blending in, then you're not committed to following Jesus. It's pretty harsh, eh? Because when you follow Him, you will be different. It's part and parcel of following Christ. You will be set apart. The word holy means to be set apart. In James it says, "Be holy as I am holy." In other words, be set apart as God is set apart. There are times that you're just going to have to stand out and make a stand. And that's when we're going to see in the life of Daniel and his three friends. Daniel chapter 1, verses 6 to 7, it says, "Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names to Daniel, the name Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego." How old were these guys, or were these boys? They think they were somewhere around the ages of 12 to 15 years old. And if you remember, they were stripped of their identity, taken 1,000 miles away from their home, crushed of all their dignity. And the first thing the king does is that he changes their names. You know, their original names, or their meanings of their names, were tied to the worship of Yahweh, the one true God. Their meanings of their names, given by their parents, were the worship and serving of Yahweh. Daniel means God is my judge, and King Nebuchadnezzar took that away from him. However, their new names, the king's names that were attributed to them, were tied to the worship of false pagan gods. Every time someone called them by name, it's a reminder, you serve our God, little boy. You don't serve Yahweh anymore. You're serving our gods, totally stripped of their identity. The next thing the king did, he changed their diet. You're supposed to eat from food that's prepared for the king. I don't know about you, but if I was presented with the king's food, I'd love it and I enjoy it. And it kind of brings me back memories of the scene from Indiana Jones and how he sat on the table. And there were, if you've seen it, Temple of Doom, I think it was, and there was food of all sorts of delicacies. It was supposed to be delicacies, but it ended up being monkey brains and all sorts, and he was totally repulsed. And if I was presented with the king's food, I can imagine everything's presented nicely and perfectly and awesome, and I don't blame him if I wanted to have a taste of that. But for Daniel and his mates, the problem was the food was prepared for the king that was mostly unclean. And according to God's rules and commandments, his people were only permitted to eat certain foods. And so this created a massive internal problem for Daniel and his friends because they wanted to honor God and worship Yahweh in every way possible. And to eat or drink anything other than what God permitted was a sin. But Daniel in chapter 1 verse 8 says, Daniel resolved in his heart not to defile himself. He resolved in his heart not to defile himself. I wonder if there's anyone here that wants to be in that situation where they resolve in their heart, I want to be just like Daniel in a tough situation. With the royal food and wine, he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Notice that he asked. He didn't demand. He done it the right way at the right time. Isn't it interesting? Daniel didn't fight back when his name was taken. And I sometimes think, why? Why is that Daniel didn't do that? An outward name, does it define who I am in my heart? You can call me whatever you want, but I know inwardly I will always worship God and know and serve my God. Take my name, I don't care, whatever. Daniel didn't defend his name. Daniel wasn't a sort of Christian, he was an all-in Christian. In the midst of his circumstances, he held resilience, he held his faith. And so before the temptation was there, he predetermined what he would do. Not what he wouldn't do, he predetermined what he would do. And that's exactly why he was successful. Sure, you can change my name? Yep, go ahead. But you want me to disobey my God? Nuh-uh. Nuh-uh. You see, he had predetermined. You put the food in front of him, he might have said, man, I'm starving. I've had nothing to eat since I've got here after being kicked out of my own or taken away from my homeland. I've got to eat something. You know, God, just this once, please. God, I know you're a forgiving God. I'll just do it just this one time. It's not really much of a biggie. I have to, I've got to eat. I've got to survive. I've got to preach a word or do whatever. Just help me out. You know, for me personally, sometimes the hardest, or I suppose the easiest sin that I could ever go into is the sin that makes sense. And Daniel could have reasoned himself. It's easy to reason himself in that situation. I'm hungry, I'm starving, and maybe he was on the brink of death. I don't know. But in that situation, that time, it would have made absolute sense to eat at least something from the king's table. But how many people here know if we're not thinking God's thoughts, we're absolutely in trouble? So here's the key, and I've said it before. Daniel predetermined, he resolved in his heart ahead of time what he was going to do. He made a decision before he was faced with the temptation to do what is right. Your success in so many different spiritual avenues will be determined by what you decide ahead of time. I'm going to say that again. Your success in so many different spiritual avenues will be determined by what you decide ahead of time. You know, there are some things you just need to decide before you go to an event. You need to predetermine in your heart. You need to decide now, today, no matter what happens in the future, I will always do such and such. You know, I've predetermined in my heart to serve God and honor Him when I'm with my mates. Maybe it's a birthday or a family gathering that you know you're going to probably react to a family member. You've got to predetermine in your heart before you get into that situation how you're going to honor God and not sin and react to the situation. When I'm with my family, how am I going to act What am I going to predetermine? When I face difficulty and temptation, today, Lord, I determine in my heart. As much as you may predetermine what you're not going to do, you need to predetermine what you're going to do. And so for me, I predetermined I'm going to church every single week. That's non-negotiable. That's a bang, straight there down the line. I'm going to predetermine worship of God as a priority for me. The teaching of the Word to empower my life. I'm going to pray Psalm 91 over my family, my whānau, every night. I'm going to get plugged into a connect group. I'm going to form relationships. I'm going to hang around. I'm not going to leave church when it's near the end just to avoid everyone talking to me. I'm going to stick around. I'm going to create relationships. I'm going to be here and get sown into the life of this church. I've predetermined that I'm going to keep my eyes pure. I'm not going to look at something that can cause me to sin and hurt my wife. You decide. It's your decision ahead of time before the temptation comes. I've resolved in my heart, Lord, you decide. You guys decide before the event what you will and won't do. Because of what you determine in your heart to do to honor your God, you will have to stand out. It's part and parcel. You're going to have to stand out. If you're never standing out, then you're always blending in. And if you're not, then you're not fully following Christ. And that's exactly what these boys did. I've resolved in my heart not to eat this food that's been dedicated to pagan gods. Daniel and his mates stood out day in, day out, week out, month in, month out. For breakfast, they stood out. At lunch, they stood out. At dinner, they stood out. And the next day, and again, they made one decision that just totally set them apart again and again and again and again and again. Just really sense God's power, just again and again. And sometimes, we might be weary, might just really be a drag sometimes, but I really sense that just choose Him again and again and again and again. And if you're following Christ, you're going to find Him. The closer you get to Him, the more often you're going to be standing out. And if you're not ashamed, because it doesn't matter what people do to you, it's all about what God has done for you. And if we think about what we're going to miss out, then I think for me that's a totally wrong perspective. But if we focus on Christ, how He thought about us in the Garden of Gethsemane, He thought about me. He didn't think about what He's going to miss out. Yeah, He's going to miss out on probably dying or whatever He thought of, but instead He thought about us. So if our focus is on God, then the things that we're going to miss out are naturally just going to fall away. So I encourage you to do that. Daniel chapter 1 verses 12 to 14, and it says, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat, water to drink. Then compare our appearance and that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate royal food. What did they do? Instead of making a big protest and kick up in a fuss, instead of throwing a hissy fit or making a scene, with wisdom they presented a plan, respecting the authority above them. Hey, can we try something else? Awesome honoring these guys. You see, you can stand out for the right things in the right way, or you can stand out for the wrong things in the wrong way. And can I just say, there are some Christians who are standing out for the wrong things in the wrong way all the time. and I'm sure you know some of them. But here at Revive, we're going to stand out in the right things in the right way. And at the right time for the right reason. But of course, we need absolute wisdom from God in how to do that. God, is it worth taking a stand? Is this worth taking a stand for? Or is it something that's not big of a deal? The king talked with him, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You see, God gave them supernatural understanding. God gave them the ability to interpret visions and dreams. And they literally redirected the course of history. Isn't that awesome? Just because one decision, they impacted history, that we can learn and hear and read about them. Because they stood for what mattered most. As a result of their obedience, they were elevated and given permission and position as advisors of the king. Wow, I wonder if there's any Daniels in this place that will give permission and advise our prime minister, our ministers in this place, in our land. Isn't it interesting that Adam and Eve lost their authority to rule when they disobeyed God? But then here we see, on the other hand, Daniel gained authority when he obeyed God. I'm coming to the near of my message. If I can ask Saskia if you'd like to come up, that'd be fantastic. Think about this. Had Daniel and his mates compromised and had not the courage to stand out, then nothing historic would have happened. And of course, we wouldn't have seen what they have done in the Bible and so on. And I don't know about you, but with all my heart, I'd rather be remembered for standing out than forgotten for blending in. And I remember going to Parachute Music, and he encouraged artists to do and be who they are. Rather than copying the next, Brooke Fraser or Elevation Worship or whatever, he encouraged them to be themselves and had their individual identity and for making a stand in who they are. And so I encourage you, that's what I want to do. I want to be the best Rima that I can be. I don't want to be Seth or Craig or Trin or Tamer, Mike. That's up to them to be the best that they are. But God has created you and me to be who we are and to stand in who we are and to not blend in. As believers in Christ, we must stand. Why? Because Jesus stood and died for us. He has called us not to be conformed to the patterns of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Then we will be able to test and approve and what His will is, His good, His pleasing, His perfect will. You can't be a part-time Christian and stand out and have victory. I wonder if there's anyone here this morning who know they need to make a stand in their lives. Perhaps you know in your heart you've been a part-time Christian and you noticed a lack of victory in your life. It's tiring. It's hard yards. It's like pushing. It's like Avery not wearing her glasses to school. All her friends who she needs to see properly if she needs, so she needs to wear them. And I said, it's like you, Bubba. That's what I call her. It's like you, Bubba. Like you're trying to push a wheel uphill and all your mates are pushing the wheel downhill because you're having to struggle with your eyesight so that you can learn. And the same can be for us. If we're leading a half-Christian filled life, we can be the same thing. We can feel like the same thing. We're pushing the wheel up a hill instead of pushing it down the hill. We're on par with God. We're on line with His Word and what He wants for our life. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 29, verse 11, "Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Awesome. I just want to pray, and I'm sure Pastor Craig will have some words after this because it's quite short. But I just want to take this time to be serious, and I know there's probably some struggles that people are going through, and it does literally feels like you're pushing a wheel uphill, and it's a tough yards, and I get it. Life is like that. But if you take a stand for God, it's the best thing you can have. God is with you.